What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my final thoughts ahead of the Game Week 35 deadline. So I'm going to go through the latest press conference information and talk about what that means for our FPL picks, go through some of your questions, and a very quick look at what the current wildcard draft is looking like as well. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Let's get into it. All right, let's start with Spurs, one of two teams with a double game week, both this week and in game week 37. And it's good news for both Richarlison and Pedro Porro. They're back for Spurs and both available for the North London derby against Arsenal. And obviously, if they come through that, they'll be available against Chelsea and so on and so on. Now, if you're looking at either putting them on your wild card or transferring them in this week, I'd be a lot more confident about Porro's minutes than I would be with Richarlison, just because of how long they've been out for. Obviously, there were doubts about whether Porro would be back for this, but he seems to be okay. And you'd expect him to go straight back into the team. Like, he's not really been missing that long, right? Obviously, Spurs didn't have a fixture in game week 34, but sorry, I'm on Richarlison there. But he started against Forest in game week 32 and played 90 minutes. Then he got 48 minutes against Newcastle, and now he's back already. So you'd assume he'll go straight back into the start 11, especially for such a big game. With Richarlison, I'd be a lot more cautious, because he hasn't started a game since game week 25 against Wolves, and that was back on the 17th of February. He has played a part in some games since then. In game weeks 29, 30, and 31, he came off the bench, but he never played more than 10 minutes in any of those games. So I'm not fully convinced that he comes straight back into the side, and I'm not even sure he's going to get a start in either game against Arsenal or Chelsea. Maybe if he comes off the bench against Arsenal and gets 20, 25 minutes, and comes through without any issues, maybe then he starts against Chelsea, but it's definitely not guaranteed, and I think it would just be maybe a little bit too risky to bring him in. Obviously, he is one of the, when he's playing that number 9 role for Spurs, he is one of their best options. The price is nice, his underlying stats have been great this year, and if you could guarantee me 60 to 70 minutes in both games, I'd possibly even put him on my wild card. I just don't think that guarantee is there. The other option, if you're keen on him, and you want to bring him in later on, is to go for a different Spurs midfielder now and just transfer to Richarlison for game week 37, especially if you're on wildcard. I think it's a little bit trickier to do that if you're playing with transfers only, or you just leave a slot open, right? You don't go for 3 Spurs players right now, but I'm just not convinced he's an option for game week 35, but I do like Porro. Elsewhere, there wasn't really any mention about any new injuries, so we've got to assume that Son, Maddison, Romero, Van de Ven, etc. are all okay. I think Son is the obvious pick to go for if you don't already own, and you can be pretty sure about his minutes, even though he came off early against Newcastle in their last match. I still quite like Maddison, because I think without injuries, when he's fit and available, his minutes are pretty good. You can be confident in his starts as well, but I also appreciate he hasn't played great recently, and you might not want to take up a midfield spot with him. Brennan Johnson and Werner, I think they're just a little bit too punty for me. I agree with most Spurs fans who think that Brennan Johnson is absolutely first choice, but it doesn't mean he's going to play every game. Whereas I think with Maddison and Son, you do get that security. And just really quickly on Porro, because some people are going to say, well, it's Arsenal at home, Chelsea away this week. Where's the clean sheets coming from? And you probably would want to bench him in game week 36 against Liverpool if you could. My argument back would be, who is getting clean sheets apart from Arsenal? I know Everton have just got a double clean sheet in game week 34, but generally, Arsenal defenders are the only ones you can really rely on a lot. And at least with Porro, you get that attacking potential as well. They got Burnley as part of their double in 37 and Sheffield United away game week 38. So I really like him, and he's one of the top defenders I'll be looking to bring in this week. So both available, Porro and Richarlison, but I suspect that Porro will start. I'm not as convinced with Richarlison. So moving on to Chelsea, it's good news for anyone that owns Cole Palmer, which is pretty much every single person watching this video. Pochettino said, we assume that Cole will be part of the squad tomorrow, so he should start against Villa away. We already know he's been in partial training, and when he's fit and available, he starts every single game. So I don't think there's anything to be too concerned about there. And for most people, you're probably going to captain him in game week 35. I think you've got to go for a double game week for the most part, and it's probably Palmer versus Son. And look, I wouldn't be completely surprised if Son does outscore him. There is a little part of me that's tempted because I know that everyone will go for Palmer. But I also know that Arsenal are so good. Maybe they go and keep a clean sheet against Spurs, or at the very least keep the score down. So I think Palmer will be the one that most people go for, and he should be fine. Elsewhere, there's just a lot of injuries. So neither Colwill or Reece James are available. Pochettino said they're close, but they are still not available. I don't think anyone's going for Reece James anyway. Possibly if you've got a spare Chelsea slot in game week 38 and you know he's starting against Bournemouth at home, that could be a nice one game week punt at the end of the season, but no one's bringing him in anytime soon. Colwell's interesting because if you're looking for a Chelsea defender right now, and Gusto is out as well, you've got the likes of Dizazi, Cucurella has started a lot of games, but when Colwell is back, he's going to affect Cucurella's minutes as well, so I'm just not sure it's really worth the risk. I just don't think there's enough upside with Chelsea defenders. You haven't got security of minutes with really any of them, and none of them are particularly attacking either. So I just don't think I would go. I think it's pretty much Palmer, Jackson, and maybe the goalkeeper. I don't think there's any other Chelsea players that I'm going to be looking at. Pochettino also said that Chukwuemeka and Sterling joined Enzo Fernandez on the injury list. So presumably Gallagher will play alongside Caicedo, and maybe Palmer will play as a number 10 a little bit more, which means Madueke might get minutes. But I don't know. As someone that's on wildcard this week, midfield is where all the interesting punts are, but it's also where all the solid picks are too. So I just don't think I would look elsewhere. But yes, the bigger one for most people is probably Gusto. Gusto is also out. I don't know what the time frame is on that one, but on Chelsea's injury list where it says they're in partial training or they're undergoing rehabilitation, he's on the latter part. So I'm not even convinced he'll be back for the Spurs game. If you're on wildcard, I think you ignore Gusto. If you don't own him and you were thinking about bringing him in, ignore him. If you already own him, I don't think there's a need to spend a transfer on going to a different Chelsea player. I would just hold on to him and hope that he's back for the double later on and also the West Ham and Bournemouth games. If you've got 3 other defenders you can just play this week, I'd probably just bench Gusto. I'm not sure it's worth using a transfer. But on wildcard, I think it is Petrovic, Jackson and Palmer, and that's about it. Maybe a Madueke punt. I mean, Gallagher is going to have the minutes, but he's going to play quite deep. I just wouldn't go there. Even if you're going only for 2 Chelsea players, I think that's fine. So I wanted to quickly cover Man City, but ultimately we haven't had a press conference from Pep Guardiola today because they played last night. So he held a press conference after the game, but there were no updates about Haaland whatsoever. There's a lot of conversation about how good Foden is and how good he's going to be in the future, but nothing that I could see about Haaland. Now, something might come out later today. We might hear something before the deadline, but at the moment we're almost going into game week 35 blind. So here's what I would say. From what's been already said by Pep, it doesn't seem like it's a big issue that's going to keep him out for a long time. And we need to remember that from game week 35 to 36, there is a week between those 2 games. It might not be exactly a week, but it's going to be 6 or 7 days. So they play, Sunday against Forest, then Saturday against Wolves. So 6 days in between that. So even if Haaland misses 35, there's a good chance he's back for 36. He's going to be one of the best captain options that week. Then obviously you've got the double in 37. So if you're on wildcard and we don't hear anything else, I'd be quite tempted to just put him in the team and maybe even bench him this week. Because if you're bench boosting in particular in game week 37, you've probably got 8 good attackers and a bit of a benching headache. So putting Haaland on the bench, although risky, does mean you've got 7 other players that look pretty decent, and then you've got him ready for game week 36. I think the conclusion that I've come to, without knowing that he's out for at least 2 game weeks, there's just not enough interesting stuff you can do with wildcard drafts by getting rid of him, because most of the good picks are in midfield anyway, and getting rid of Haaland doesn't increase the amount of slots you have. It just gives you more money to spend, but most people can already get the midfielders they want. Maybe you could go for João Pedro and Salah, someone like that, but then you're dropping a double game week player, and if you want Haaland back for the double, that's then 2 transfers to do it. Maybe you could go for Alvarez and just leave yourself 1 transfer. But I just don't think there's enough value in getting rid of him unless we find out he's out for more than just game week 35. And by the way, he might even be fine for that game. And if you don't want to risk it, you could absolutely start him. For people not on wildcard, I think if you didn't own Haaland and we get no more news, I would just continue going without him. Keep it in the back of your mind, how am I going to get him in when I want to? But I probably wouldn't bring him in this week. And if you already own him and you've got 7 other attackers that you can play and you're pretty happy with it, I'd probably just leave it at that. I guess there is maybe a viewpoint from some people. They're just going to go without him and take the risk that he won't be back or he'll get reduced minutes and you're going to go against him and captain other players. I really don't mind that. But I guess you've got to be certain about that. Can you go through that? If you know he's definitely back for 36 and he's going to play both games in 37, can you go through and not own him? If you can, great. Go with it. Spread that money around. Go for a better squad overall. if you're someone that can't really do that, don't kid yourself about it, because otherwise you leave yourself stuck later, and then you got to take hits and stuff to bring him in. But if I already owned him, I'd probably just keep hold of him. And on wildcard, with the information we have right now, I'd probably go with him. But I'm leaning towards personally benching him. You don't have to do that, right? You can just put him in the 11. If he doesn't play again, obviously someone will sub in. So there's quite a bit of info from Newcastle's press conference, but not a huge amount that would probably change any players that you're looking to bring in this week. Obviously, they've got a good fixture run. Sheffield United at home, Burnley away, Dublin in 37, then Brentford away in 38. Eddie Howe on Callum Wilson said, Callum came through fine. I thought he looked good and worked well with the lads around him. This is the game against Crystal Palace when he came on as a sub. He had a couple of dangerous moments. That was a positive from Wednesday. Now, I don't think there's anything to be worried about in terms of picking Isak. Will we see situations where Isak gets a few less minutes over the next kind of 4 game weeks? Probably. But I don't think it's enough to not choose him, because he's one of the best forward picks right now, especially when you're walking straight into Sheffield United at home and you've got that double later. There is definitely the possibility that Isak only starts 1 game in 37 and Wilson gets the other one if he's still fit at that point. But I don't think there's enough there to really worry about it, because if you want to go for a different double game week play, you're looking at the likes of João Pedro and Haaland, and I think I would just go with Isak now, take that Sheffield United fixture and Burnley away in 36, and also just hope for the best in the double. I guess if Callum Wilson really did come through okay and he's feeling good and fully fit, there is a chance that Isak could get benched for Sheffield United, because the last game against Palace was, not that long ago. It was a midweek fixture. But I just don't think it's going to happen. I think Isak's going to start. I think anyone that's considering getting him in, it looks good. On Livramento, he said, Tino came on against Tottenham and had a slight reaction in his ankle after that game. It was minimal. It's the same story with a few of the players. We are having to look after him, and hopefully those few days rest will make a big difference. Let's see how he feels today before making a decision on him tomorrow. Livramento is not an option for your FPL team. It's Dan Burn or Share as it stands. Still no word on when Trippier could be back. There's a few people worried that, if Livramento and Trippier come back, could it see Dan Burn come out of the team? I don't see it. Dan Burn's pretty much nailed for me. So I think he's the cheap option, or you go for Share instead. And then just lastly, he talked about Nick Pope, Joelinton, and Almiron. He just said they are getting close. So I'm not going to go into the rest, because ultimately those players are not really options. I think with Dubravka, because there is still a chance Pope comes back before the end of the season, I would not buy him and I would not put him on wildcard. But if I had him, I wouldn't be in a rush to get rid of him. The next 2 fixtures are good. You're going to get more updates about what the situation is with Nick Pope. And if you get to 37 and Pope's back, then you can deal with Dubravka then. And if he's not, you've got a double game week player ready and waiting with 2 good fixtures beforehand. So I'd probably just keep hold of Dubravka, but probably not one to buy right now. I think the options you're looking at buying new are Share, Burn, Gordon and Isak, and that's probably about it. So just quickly on Crystal Palace, I don't think many people are bringing their players in now, but you might have some left over from game week 34. Michael Olise is fit to start the game tomorrow, and obviously he was benched in their midweek fixture, so you would assume he will start against Fulham. So if you've got him and you're not looking to transfer him out, he looks like a good option to play. He also said, Glasner, Eze is questionable for tomorrow. He has a problem with his knee. We will decide tomorrow. Now, given that he's had a few injuries this season and just played the last 2 games in quick succession, I wouldn't be completely surprised if they're just careful with him, because there's not really a massive reason for them to rush players, or in this, not really rush because Eze's been back for a while, but there's no real reason to risk players. It's not like they're at risk of being relegated or anything like that. So I would be a little concerned if I had Eze, purely because they might just be careful with him. I think for most people, there's no rush to sell Crystal Palace players because their fixtures are actually okay, but there's no doubles or anything like that. And obviously Eze, Olise, etc. are taking up midfield slots where there's quite a few players to pick from. So if you're struggling with who to sell and you've got Eze and you want to bring in another player with either a double this week or good fixtures to come, I'd probably get rid of him. But I probably wouldn't start taking -4s and stuff like that. And if you can bench him, great. But for anyone that's in that specific scenario where they need to get rid of someone they're not sure, I'd maybe use this as the excuse to do it. So for anyone that's still got Ivan Toney, this is what Thomas Frank has said, quite similar to last week, to be honest. Ivan is progressing, he is better, and a qualified hope he is available for Saturday. There is one more training, so let's see. So basically, he wants to start, he's getting better. Obviously, Everton away is not the worst fixture in the world, not easy either, but it's still not a guarantee. honestly, if you've kept hold of him this long, just get rid of him. I know the fixtures overall for Brentford are pretty decent, even though they haven't got any doubles. But it's just not worth this headache every week. I'd rather go and buy Nicholas Jackson or Isak or go back to Watkins, go for Haaland, João Pedro. You just don't want this issue every single week because there's no guarantee he'll even play. And then you'll be in exactly the same situation against Fulham. I don't know what's going on, why he's not playing. Maybe it is just an issue he can't quite get over. But either way, it's just not worth the headache. Just sell him. All right, let's get into some of your questions. So are there any single game week defenders other than Arsenal worth considering over Spurs, Man United and Brighton ones for bench boost 37? There's definitely some good options. I would say with Spurs in particular, obviously Pedro Porro is great. I prefer him over any single game week players. But also keep in mind that Spurs do have Burnley at home as one of their fixtures. They do have a good chance of a clean sheet. And then you can almost see the Man City game as a bonus, although I completely get that Man City could score enough goals where you start going into negative points. But generally, I quite like Spurs. With Man United, it's Arsenal and Newcastle both at home, so the chances of a clean sheet are quite low. I think there are probably single game week teams that have got a better chance of keeping a clean sheet, but you never know at home, and there could be some attacking potential on top from Maguire and Dalot. And Brighton, I'm not really that interested in. Last night hasn't helped, although I do appreciate that was against Man City. But Brighton's double is Newcastle away and Chelsea at home. I'm just not sure they get a clean sheet in either. But anyway, moving on to single game week players. So in game week 37, I think there's a couple of fixtures that stand out. Everton versus Sheffield United at home. So someone like Branthwaite, Mikalenko, if he's fit, could be an option. Probably not someone you would go for now because I think he's currently flagged. Yeah. A 25% chance of playing ankle injury. So you'd probably just go for Branthwaite or Tarkowski in that case. Ain't Nuri against Crystal Palace at home could be really nice as well if he's still fit at that point because he's so attacking. I guess the question to ask yourself or something to think about is, do you need these players in any other game weeks? Because for Ain't Nuri, it's Luton at home this week, which is nice. Palace at home in the double, but it's City and Liverpool away in 36 and 38. So it's not a player that you're going to want to play most weeks, but 2 out of the final 4 are not bad. I don't think there's too many other single game week players like West Ham versus Luton at home. I don't think I'd want to back a West Ham defender in that game. Reguilon possibly, but the game for Brentford is away in 37 against Bournemouth. You could see someone like Solanke scoring in that, and the rest of them are all there in the double game week players that we've talked about a lot. Would I go for Ain't Nuri or Branthwaite over Maguire or Dalot? Maybe not. Maybe there's a little bit of Man United bias in there, but I don't know. I just always prefer to back the doubles. But I think you can make a case that Ain't Nuri is probably better than both of those, and similar with possibly Everton defenders. Because in that game week when we get there, the clean sheet odds for Everton are going to be so high because of the fixture. But who knows? Maybe they'll be safe at that point, and maybe Sheffield United will give them a bit of a game. But also Sheffield United might just be officially relegated, so you just don't know. So there's a few players, but not a huge amount. So is Ollie Watkins as good, if not better, than the likes of Isak and Jackson, even without double game weeks? And the answer is, he absolutely could be. Will I be going there? Absolutely not. But it wouldn't surprise me if he outscores those kind of players because that's the kind of season he's had. Villa are one of the best attacking teams in the league. Watkins seems to have been on an upward trajectory in terms of performances under Unai Emery. There's a lot to like about him, right? You don't need me to sit here and tell you that Ollie Watkins is a good forward that's going to continue to score points. I mean, I look at the fixtures they've got, and it's Chelsea at home this week. I mean, Chelsea defence is not amazing by any stretch. Brighton away in 36, definitely goals in that one. Liverpool at home in 37, league title could be over at that point. I mean, Liverpool might still be fighting the top 4 depending on how results go over the next couple. You could see Villa causing that defence a few problems. Then it's Palace away in 38. So I wouldn't look at Villa's fixtures and say they're amazing, but there's definitely goals in there. But for me, I just got to back the double game weeks, and there's literally no doubt in my mind about it. I've not once considered Ollie Watkins as an option on wildcard 35. And I would do the same, I think, if I was just using transfers this week because I'd already used my wildcard. Like, there's nothing wrong going with him if that's what you want to do, but I've got to back the doubles. And look what happened in game week 34, right? Going into that week, lots of talk about Watkins versus Bournemouth at home, a really good single game week player. And what did Mateta do? He absolutely smashed him. Now, that was a bit of a freak event. I'm not expecting Jackson and Isak to do that, especially when it's not a 1 game week shootout. It's over 4 game weeks. But it's possible they outscore them. Jackson in particular will get a few chances. He's got 2 extra fixtures. Can he score more points with appearance points and stuff like that? It's possible, right? And I will definitely take that risk. And with Isak, look, Watkins is brilliant, but if you think Isak's going to continue to start, I think you could even argue without the double in 37, just look at 35 and 36, I'd rather have Isak anyway than Watkins, because Watkins has got Chelsea at home, Brighton away, which are not bad by any means. But for Newcastle, it's Sheffield United at home and Burnley away. So if you think Isak starts these 2 games, bearing in mind Isak's also on penalties, Watkins isn't, I think in isolation I'd rather have Isak, and then he's got a double as well. So there's really no doubt in my mind, and it's not one of those where I'm like 100% certain this is the right call. Like in the past I've said this player is definitely going to outscore this one. That's not the case here, but there's also no doubts in my mind about going against Watkins. I'm not even particularly worried about it. I just don't think you can worry about these kind of decisions. Obviously, Watkins could go and score 2 goals this week, 2 goals next week, and it's going to hurt. But whatever, right? These things happen in FPL. I think at some point you've got to back the fixtures. And with Chelsea, it's the extra ones. And with Isak, it's how good they are. And also how good he is of an option. Like if I was free hitting this week and next week, I'd go for Isak over Watkins both times, I think. Even if Watkins scored a hat-trick this week, I'd probably still bank on Isak outscoring him against Burnley, as long as we think he's going to play. If you've got doubts over the minutes, it's a different conversation, but I don't really. So, yeah, is he as good? Probably. Will I be going there? Definitely not. So if we're not on wildcard, should we prioritise selling Liverpool or Arsenal players? Now, generally, I'd probably say keep Arsenal players before Liverpool ones. But as always, it's going to depend on the individual player that you're talking about. So as an example, right, Darwin, Diaz, Jota and Gakpo, I would sell all of those players before I sell any of my Arsenal attackers like Odegaard, Saka and Havertz. I just think from a minutes perspective, you know those Arsenal players are almost certain to start, and the fixtures they've got remaining are pretty decent for an attacker. Even Spurs away this week, I know it's a North London derby, it can be tricky, but going into that game, the Spurs defence isn't all that, and the Arsenal attack is very good, right? So you'd be more than happy to play those players there. Then it's Bournemouth, United, and then Everton last day. So I think most Arsenal attackers over most Liverpool, apart from maybe Salah, and despite how bad he's been recently, we've just been here so many times before that he can just turn it on at a moment's notice. And look, it just wouldn't surprise me against West Ham away if he goes and gets a couple of attacking returns. That being said, there is a little bit more, I don't know, hesitancy on that compared to normal, because I'm not even convinced he definitely starts. Like seasons gone by, there'll be no question, right? They're still in with a chance of winning the league. The chances are very low now, I get that, but it's still possible. They're still fighting for top 4 as well. There's just no way that Salah would get benched. Yeah, it happened against Fulham, and he's played 90 minutes against Everton. And then you've got another game at 12:30 on Saturday, which, as I've said many times this week, Klopp absolutely hates. So, I don't know. I think Salah will start, but I'm not as confident as normal. So I even think I'd maybe sell Salah before any of Saka, Odegaard and Havertz, which sounds crazy when I say it out loud. I just don't think it makes much sense. But that's kind of the situation we're in. I'm just a little bit more hesitant on Salah compared to the rest of the Liverpool attack, because if he does play, there's every chance he'll go and get something. The other thing to think about is whether you need the cash for other moves. Like if you're someone that's not wildcarding but you are bench boosted in 37, you've got to start improving that squad overall, and selling Salah can definitely help with that. So look, I didn't think at the start of the season I'd be saying keep Saka over Salah, but I feel like that's kind of the position we're in. I'm a little bit unsure, as you can tell, because it feels a little bit kind of knee-jerky that he's not been great for a few games and now we're getting rid. But I guess in football, sometimes you've got to just roll with that, right? So I don't know. If you want to keep Salah over any Arsenal attacker, I think it's fair. Anyone else, there's no question for me. On the defenders, similar conversation. I think the only Liverpool defender I would consider keeping over an Arsenal one is Trent, because you know how attacking he can be, but also he's much more expensive. So what does that stop you doing? I think Robertson and Van Dijk I would get rid of before Gabriel, Saliba, Ben White, because ultimately the Arsenal defence is the best in the league, and they will go and get clean sheets before this season is out. Liverpool, I think there's a little bit more, chance of that not happening, right? Their defence hasn't been watertight. It's not a terrible defence by any stretch, but it's not as good as Arsenal. But Trent is the one you'd maybe keep over any of the others, just because of how attacking he can be. He's also a massive differential as well. He's a little bit more money, so you have to weigh up what what it can do for you. Overall, I think you sell Arsenal. I think you sell Liverpool before Arsenal. So which Man City defender, including Ederson, do you prefer? And is Walker being overlooked? And I feel like every time I get asked about a Man City defensive option, it's just a lost cause. Whatever I say will be wrong. It's so difficult to predict what's going to happen, even in a short time that we have left before the end of the season. Now, for what it's worth, Ederson is very likely to be on my wild card, and I'm pretty sure he's nailed right up until the point that Man City win the league. So what you need if you buy Ederson is for Arsenal to keep winning games, because the sooner that title is over, the sooner Ortega comes into the 11, right? We saw it happen last year. Will that definitely happen this year with no European involvement? Possibly not, but there's still an FA Cup match, and we know that Pep likes to give other players a chance once the league is done. So I think Ederson is nailed up until that point, and hopefully he'll get through game week 37 at least. And if you've got a second keeper that you can play in 38 because you're sure they're going to keep their place, then happy days. With the defenders, it's just so difficult to know which one's going to play every single game. Obviously, there is a bit of time between most matches now, but they've just played on Thursday. They're playing again on Sunday. There could be some rotation. And obviously, it feels now like Walker's been overlooked, because on the last video that I was asked about Man City defenders, I thought Ruben Dias was probably the most likely to play every game. He didn't play against Brighton. My second choice was Vardio because he's quite attacking, but Ake's there. He could play left back. And now Kyle Walker's gone and got 2 assists against Brighton. Look, will Walker play every game? Possibly. It could happen, right? But it could also be that Rico Lewis plays right back or Akanji plays right back and Walker gets a little bit of a break in one of those games. You just can't say for sure. Obviously, with Walker, he's not that long back from injury. He came back in the Real Madrid game and then he started straight away against Brighton. Maybe they will just play him every single game until, another injury comes along. But I just can't be sure. And I feel like I don't really have anything better to offer, unfortunately, other than Vardio, Walker, and probably Ruben Dias are your best options. Can I guarantee you they start all 5 of the remaining fixtures? No. Will they start at least 4? Probably. Like, if I had to pick one right now, maybe I would choose Kyle Walker, but I also feel that that's quite reactive based on what happened last night. But I can't say Ruben Dias anymore because he's literally just got taken back out of the team. So it's really Walker or Vardio. I don't know, what's more likely, Ake to play left back or Akanji or Rico Lewis to play right back? I would probably say it's Ake playing left back, in which case Walker's maybe slightly more nailed. But it's just a minefield, right? You just don't know. So if you're looking for someone that's almost guaranteed to play every game until the league's done, it's Ederson. If I was going for a defender, I guess I would go for Walker. But it depends on the combination you're going for, especially if you're on wildcard, right? Onana and Walker versus Ederson and Dalot. The Ederson and Dalot combination is probably a little bit more expensive, but I think it's a little bit kind of safer as well. Yeah, Man City defense, I just don't know. I never know with them. It's too tricky, and whatever you say in a couple of weeks, it's always different anyway. So I'm going to try and really quickly talk about my team, because obviously I did the team selection video earlier, and not a huge amount has changed. Obviously, as you know, right, from experience of being on wildcard, there's a lot of tinkering that goes on right up until the deadline. It's usually over only kind of 2 to 4 spots, but that's kind of the situation that I'm in. So right now, I've got Ederson and Petrovic in goal instead of Ederson and Vicario. I still really like Vicario. I'm just not sure I'm prepared to go for double Spurs defence with Arsenal at home and Chelsea away this week. And also it leaves a slot open to maybe get Richarlison or Maddison or Brennan Johnson, whoever looks good ahead of game week 37. I'm not sure I would actually use a transfer on any of my midfielders to get a Spurs one in, but at least the option's there. So as it stands, I've got 2 Spurs, 3 Chelsea instead of the other way around that I had this morning. But that might change back later on. I've still got Gabriel and Saliba. If I've got money in the bank, I may change Saliba to Ben White, but it really depends on what my future moves might be. Like if it's getting tight to bring, like Salah could be an option in game week 38, for example, if we know he's starting, last home game for Klopp. He's someone I don't want to completely rule out. So I don't know whether I'll spend that 0.4 getting Ben White, but I do think White is better than Saliba. So Gabriel, Saliba, Porro, Dalot and Burn. I might just go for Maguire because it's $1 million saving, but I do think Dalot is slightly better for stuff like bonus, probably slightly more attacking as well. The midfield is Foden, Palmer, Fernandes, Gordon, and Son. So similar, exactly the same to earlier. Then I've still got Jackson, Haaland, and Isak. And as it stands, I'm going to bench Haaland. Even though when you say that out loud, it kind of scares me a little bit. But I think he is a bit of a doubt. But he is someone that I want later on. I'm still coming around. I'm still thinking about the idea of going for a second Spurs attacker. There's part of me that just keeps coming back to you're wildcarding into a double game week for two teams that also have another double game week later. Just get 6 of their players. Just stop overthinking it. And if you go for Petrovic in goal, it would have to then be a second Spurs attacker. The one I really want is Maddison because I'm pretty sure about his starts and minutes. But obviously Richarlison and Brennan Johnson are options. The problem is there's a little bit of manoeuvring that needs to happen. So first of all, do I get rid of Gordon or Fernandes for Maddison? Neither seems great, even though Maddison's got the double this week. Fernandes and Gordon have both got really good fixtures. It would probably be for Anthony Gordon, and I would just bring Maddison in instead. So this is more similar to the draft I put out on Monday. Then I've got to free up 0.4 million. I think it would actually be a double change where I bring in Fabian Schär. Because that's the thing to consider, right? I know that Gordon looks great against Sheffield United at home. And to be honest with you, he probably is better than Maddison. This really is just a fixtures play. But by dropping Gordon, you get a better defender. Like, I'd rather have Schär than Dalot, for example. Or even I could just have both. I'd have to free up 0.8 million, so I'd probably have to sell Saliba. So maybe I would go for Maguire, for example. So that's kind of... Let's say I go with that draft with Petrovic. That's the dilemma. Maguire, Schär, and Maddison, or Saliba, Dalot, and Gordon. I suspect most people prefer the latter, but the first one gets me a few more fixtures, and I quite like having that double Newcastle defence. So the problem is, with Isak in the team as well, it locks me out of getting Gordon back in later. And I think the one thing you have with him is security. You know he's going to start. You know his minutes are good. He's taking some set pieces as well at the moment. There's not many players you can kind of say about that. So I don't know. I keep going back to Gordon. I just don't like going with less than 6 doublers, even though it might be the right call because the Spurs and Chelsea fixtures aren't great. I just don't like doing it. So that's kind of where I'm stuck. Could other players change like Foden, Fernandes? Maybe, but I doubt it. And I think the front three is locked: Jackson, Haaland, and Isak. And my captain will almost certainly be Palmer instead of Son. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there because things could change in the next 5 minutes after I stop recording this. You'll see on the deadline stream tomorrow. I'll probably hide a few picks that I'm not completely sure about. But overall, you know which players are kind of locked in at the moment. I mean, I could even go, by the way, Edison and Maguire to Onana and Walker. That's another option. I just don't know if I want to risk the minutes of Walker. Like, it's just... Man City defenders are just so annoying. They just really are. But maybe that is a slightly better way to go. But then I've got to play Onana against Crystal Palace away or Petrovic against West Ham at home 36. Maybe that's not that bad. That's another way I could go for it. I've got exact money for that draft. Maybe it doesn't look too bad. No Man United defence apart from Onana. That's probably okay, to be honest. I don't know. Give it a like if you enjoy it. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Rate 5 stars if you listen on podcast. And I'll catch you tomorrow for the deadline stream, hoping to start at 9 AM UK time. I'll catch you then.